All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'll give it a minute or so for everyone to join. All right. Thank you guys for joining us today. Today, we're going to be hosting a webinar for you guys on the topic of acing the boards to prepare for the COMLEX 1 exam. I'm sure many of you guys are beginning to prep for your exam and just need some pointers on how to go about it, whether it's certain strategies or advice on how to prepare for your exam. So I'm sure you guys will find a lot of value and beneficial information from this webinar, and we're really looking forward to hosting it for you guys. So without further ado, I'll allow Brianna or Samantha if they'd like to introduce themselves, and then Dr. Halpern can go ahead and begin.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Hope your first week of summer has been great and relaxing. Not to stress you out, but we take boards next year. So just wanted to do this really quickly just to let you guys see, or let all of us see, like what's coming down the line. So thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
All right, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Rob Halpern. I just finished up my 4th year of medical school at NYIT Com. I will be starting residency in July at NYU for orthopedic surgery. And just a little bit about me and my background. I went to University of Michigan for undergrad. I worked in EMS for about 2 years before I actually started medical school. And not too long ago, I was kind of in the same situation that you guys were in. I kind of knew I wanted to join a surgical subspecialty pretty early on. I was between orthopedics, plastic surgery, and neurosurgery for a bit. Ultimately, I went into orthopedics. It's kind of where my true passion was. But knowing that I wanted to join a competitive surgical specialty, I was really focused on boards from kind of the get-go of medical school. This was kind of during the time where they started talking about board exams going from pass-fail, especially for step 1, COMLEX level 1. So I knew I kind of had to get a strategy going on early in order to attain success and eventually get to where I wanted to be going. During my time throughout NYIT, I kind of served as a mentor and a tutor informally and formally. And during my 4th year, I started working with MedSchoolCoach to actually tutor students and get them to where they really need to be going and really get the exam scores that they want for the specialties that they want. So just a little bit more about my background. I ended up scoring 262 on step 1, 775 on COMLEX level 1, a 873 on COMLEX level 2, and a 276 on step 2. So everything like within the 99th percentile. And I think I kind of developed some strategies throughout medical school and throughout my board prep that really helped me. And I learned a lot from my first board prep going into my second that allowed me to kind of hone in on my strategies, make my dedicated studies period a little bit easier. And I kind of want to share that with you guys today. So we're going to talk about step and level 1, whether or not those matter anymore with the exams going to pass-fail, how you should incorporate practice questions, especially throughout this next year, now that you really start to think about COMLEX level 1 and eventually, down the road, step 2 and COMLEX level 2, when you need to take your exam, how to set up a study schedule, all the advice I could give you there. And some of my favorite resources I used while I was preparing for COMLEX and STEP. And then finally, we'll talk about how MedSchoolCoach can kind of help you and guide you in the right direction. And then we'll open up to some questions and answers at the end. And hopefully we can answer everything that you guys might have. So does STEP or COMLEX level 1 matter anymore? I think that this is a big question that people ask. Since it's gone past fail, there's definitely less of an emphasis on this exam. But people want to see you pass this on your first attempt, whether that be step 1 or level 1. We're going to mainly focus on level 1 for now, but it is important that you do pass the exam on your first attempt. You aren't being scored, so it's not kind of a weeder anymore where they kind of want to see a certain score on this exam for certain residencies or subspecialties. But it is a good test to assess your fundamental knowledge. And it is a really good predictor of how you will do on your future board exams. So people do jump from step 1 to step 2, or from COMLEX level 1 to COMLEX level 2. And that's not unheard of, but your best predictor of how you'll do on COMLEX level 2 or step 2 is how you're doing on these exams. And I know it's not scored now, but you get a percentage based off your own feedback, based off of how your UWorld questions are going, or your practice CBS essays, or your practice MBMEs, and that can all kind of guide you to see how you're doing and how you're preparing and how effectively and efficiently you're preparing for these exams. So I personally believe that the best way to do well in school and the best way to do well on your board exams is to do practice questions. Ultimately, this test is assessing your knowledge of all the content that you learned throughout your first 2 years, and it can seem very overwhelming, but there are a lot of resources out there that can really point you in the right direction and assess your knowledge. And ultimately, taking questions or taking tests is a skill set that you can learn. So I think that doing practice questions early and doing them often is your best way to kind of start your board prep and really get you on the right foot. So what I recommend is kind of starting at the beginning of your second year. If you haven't already started during the second half of your first year, I think using either question banks that are dedicated to specific content that you're learning in school, or just kind of filtering out based off of the topics or subjects that you're learning, is a great way not only to prepare for the boards, but it's also a great way to prepare for the tests that you're taking in school. So for instance, if you're going over cardiology, I think going over the cardio questions in either any of the question banks like AMBOSS, USMLE RX, or UWorld is a great way to prepare for your content exams. You'll see questions that you probably wouldn't have seen otherwise. They'll definitely ask you higher order questions, make you incorporate other fields that you've studied in the past or haven't yet reached. And it's okay if you're not getting the percentage that you want correct when you first start. Nobody ever starts off getting 100% correct or 90% correct or even 70% correct. Everybody starts off around a similar place, and it's kind of up to you to learn how the questions are being asked of you, what content they're asking, and it's a skill that you develop over time. So when you first start off, it's very overwhelming. It definitely takes a lot more time than what you'd expect, but as you progress throughout the year, things start to get a lot easier and it starts becoming a lot more fluid, and you definitely get a lot better with these. So I think starting off the second half of your preclinical education, incorporating these practice questions based off of the content you're reviewing is only going to help you do well on your exams, and it's going to help you prepare for boards. A lot of people have questions of whether or not they should be using UWorld when they're kind of preparing for content review, like for what you're learning in school. And in my opinion, you can. UWorld has around 3,700 questions now dedicated for step 1 / COMLEX level 1. And what you tend to see is around 3,000 questions, you start to hit a plateau on how people would do on your board exam. So if that was step 1, usually around 3,000 questions is when you hit a plateau and your exam scores start to increase, but increase less exponentially. And you should do those questions kind of closer towards your actual dedicated time period. So if you want to start off with something like USMLE RX or AMBOSS to kind of get an idea of these questions before you start dipping into the UWorld question bank, that's kind of a good idea. This way, you kind of get these fresh new questions when you're actually starting to get dedicated. You'll have a new base of where you want to start your percentage at. So if you're starting off in the 40s, because you started UWorld during the first half of your preclinical education, or the second half of your preclinical education, you start off with 40%, and then maybe 4 months before you're about to take your board exams, you're up into the 80s. You're going to see around that 50 to 60%, it's going to be hard to judge your incremental increase. And you're also not going to be repeating the questions that you maybe did 6 months prior. So I definitely would recommend starting off with a different question bank if you don't plan on resetting your UWorld before you actually go on to do your dedicated board prep. And with that being said, when you're doing question banks, it's more important to get through one question bank fully than it is to do AMBOSS, USMLE RX, UWorld question banks, any other question banks that you may have heard, and just kind of nitpicking from all of them. What I did for step 1 and COMLEX level 1 is I used USMLE RX, and this is just my own personal experience, and you guys can kind of modify this however you want. I used USMLE RX to kind of prepare for my subject exams, and then about 2 to 3 months before I was going to take my board exam, that's when I started using UWorld. I didn't get through all of USMLE RX, but I got through all of UWorld, and I was able to do all my incorrects in UWorld. For step 2, I modified it a little bit differently. I did all of UWorld and all of AMBOSS, and then I repeated UWorld. So there's no harm in repeating UWorld for your dedicated and starting with it now. But if you do start with it earlier on, I would recommend that you eventually do repeat that. And then there's also kind of the saying like less is more. So I think when it comes to also picking review sources, question banks, all that stuff, try to stick to at most 3 different ones. So maybe like 1 or 2 question banks and 2 or 3 content review materials. First aid, Pathoma, Boards and Beyond, Sketchy, those are all great. I know a lot of people use Anki. All great resources to kind of help you learn content while you're preparing for your subject exams and when you eventually start to prepare for board exams. And what you'll see is in all these board review resources, they will help you when you're actually preparing for your subject exams as well. So just a little bit more about how you incorporate these. What I would recommend is you start off really slow, anywhere from 5 to 10 a day, or even 10 every other day. And sorry, I'll try to answer all the questions at the end this way I just don't get too sidetracked. So incorporating the questions, yeah, try to do like 5 or 10 a day, or you could do like 5 every other day or 10 every other day to start. Focus on the material that you're learning in school. This will help you identify gaps in your knowledge. It will help you kind of retain information, and it will help you do better on your subject exams. And then once again, when you first start off, it's not going to be what you want. And it's important not to get discouraged with this. Where you start isn't where you finish. It certainly isn't where I started and where I finished. It's not where pretty much anybody starts and where they finish. You'll see that your scores definitely increase as you learn more material, because the questions tend to ask you questions. Maybe you're doing cardiology and there's biochem incorporated, or maybe you're doing a neuro subject and there's biochem or genetics in there that you haven't quite learned yet, or you haven't reviewed in almost a year. It's good to kind of see that that's the way questions will be asked early, and you'll be able to review that while you're reviewing your questions. But it's a learning tool. It's something to gauge your progress, and it's something to help you prepare. So when should you take your board exams? That's also another major question. So most medical schools tend to have a period near the end of second year before third year where you have a little bit of time off. And this varies from school to school. Some people have 8 weeks, some people have 4 weeks. And it really all depends on you. What I recommend is you try to take your exam 1 to 2 weeks before you start taking, before your third year starts, before your clinical rotation start. This way you get a little bit of a break before you go into clinical. You'll be able to get all the like administrative tasks that you need to get done, all the clearances that you need to get done without having to worry about it while you're preparing for your exams. And you'll feel probably the most confident during this time period because you're able to solely dedicate your kind of mental resources, like your entire mental reserves, to taking this test, preparing for the test. And ultimately, you're probably not going to ever feel 100% ready for the exam. The exam covers so much material, and nobody ever feels confident on 100% of the material. But at one point or another, you will notice that your scores kind of tend to plateau, or maybe they're starting to regress a little bit. And that's kind of where you want to be taking your exam. When you're reaching that peak of your scores, you definitely don't want to study for too long and start to get burned out. because that also happens. People can try to study for 12 weeks doing a dedicated time period, and 12 weeks may not be as good as 6 weeks for some people. It all depends. It all depends on how much you want to study per day, how many days a week you want to study, what other commitments you have going on. If you're still in school, but your course load is less, if you have a second job, if you have to do other things, that all will kind of factor into how long you want to be preparing for boards. So when you eventually are looking to set up a study schedule and take the exam, it all kind of starts off with creating a schedule. And the way that I did this, I had my test date. So you need a test date first, or a general framework of when you're going to be taking the test. Preferably, you'll know within that 1 week of when you're going to be taking that test, and really commit to taking that test within that time period. Because this will allow you to determine how many weeks you have to study, and what other commitments you have. So what I would do about 6 to 8 weeks beforehand for step 1 and level 1, I made a study schedule about 7 weeks beforehand, and I wrote it out in pencil on a blank piece of paper, just kind of crossing off every single day. I broke it down by weeks, and I broke it down by days. And what you want to do is you want to give yourself enough time to get through all the questions in UWorld, and you want to be able to get all your practice assessments in, and you want to be able to get some content review in, whether that be every other day or every day for a certain amount of time. And you need to make this very realistic, because you want your study schedule to be something that you can stick to, that you are able to kind of cross off every day and not leave things on the table that you need to catch up on. You need something that you're able to do every single day, and really be committed to it, because otherwise setting up a study schedule that's way too involved or has too many things in a day and you can't get to, it's only going to kind of make you more anxious when you start preparing for the test, because you're going to be thinking back like, oh, I didn't cover this day, and now I need to increase my workload over here, but I'm already doing 10 hours a day, and then you start to spiral. So I think the first thing that you need to do, you need to break it down into the number of weeks that you have. I think that you want to aim for a sweet spot of anywhere from 5 to 8 weeks of dedicated time period. And you want to know how many weeks is actually completely dedicated, meaning you don't have any other school commitments, no other work commitments. Or if you do have work commitments, how often are they? Is it 1 day a week you're working? Is it 3 days a week you're working? What hours you're going to be working? Any social commitments, weddings, engagement parties, friends' birthday parties, your own birthday party, something like that. Graduations, friends and family graduations, schedule those all in. Everything is important to schedule, and even if it seems like kind of silly, if your birthday is during dedicated, you definitely want to take that day off or take the day after off. You need to be able to have a life while you're doing this, otherwise you'll also burn yourself out. So me personally, I gave myself 1 day off every single week, and I made my day off pretty flexible. So people who aren't in the medical field or in medical school tend to work Monday through Friday. So what I did is Saturday and Sunday were my day to take off. I would take either Saturday off or Sunday off. And I kind of left that open because I wanted to be able to go out with my friends if they were going out Friday night. And I know everybody was going to some event. I wanted to be able to go out Friday night and take Saturday off. And if people were doing something Saturday night, I wanted to be able to take Sunday off and work Saturday. So I always left Saturday, Sunday as flexible, but Monday through Friday was always pretty rigid in what I needed to accomplish. And I always kind of structured things where Monday through Thursday were my busiest days, Friday was a little bit less, and Saturday and Sunday were a little bit less. The number of hours that you want to study a day is also completely up to you. I would recommend anywhere from 6 to 10 hours is probably enough. Anything over 10 hours starts to become a little bit too much. And what I mean by 6 to 10 hours is actual time you're studying. This doesn't include your break time. This doesn't include, if you're reviewing questions and you say that it's going to take me an hour to review 40 questions, that doesn't mean that you now get 90 minutes to review those questions. It has to be that dedicated amount of time that you're willing to put in every day, and you have to reach the numbers that you want to hit. Otherwise, things start to spiral. So once you have the number of hours that you want to work a week and the number of weeks you have, then I think the next thing you do, schedule in all your social commitments, other commitments, and kind of mark those days off first. Then what I do is I kind of count the number of days I have, and I have that as like a hard number. The last 3 days before the test, I kind of make it a lot lighter. I don't schedule anything. I leave those for like my last minute reviews, trying not to do many questions at all. And it kind of gives me a little bit of buffer if I ever needed it. Once you have the number of days that you're going to be studying, so let's say you have 50 days, then what you need to do is, or it'll probably be more like 30 days. If you have 30 days that you're going to be studying every single day, what you need to do is you need to mark out the days that you're going to be taking tests. So if you're taking a practice MBME, if you're doing your world self-assessment 1, your world self-assessment 2, if your school requires you to take a COMSA that day, you need to mark off those days, because realistically that entire day is just spent doing an exam and reviewing that exam. You're not going to be able to do additional questions, or you're not going to be able to do a lot of additional questions, and you're probably not going to be able to do content review. So those days are marked out for just like pure testing. And then every other day that you have that's available, you divide the number of UWorld questions that you have to do by those number of days, and that gives you the number of questions that you need to do a day. So usually that works out to anywhere from 80 to around 120 questions a day. And what I say is try to do your questions timed, because that keeps you to doing your questions within that 1 hour time frame, and then spend anywhere, depending on how you're doing, anywhere from 60 minutes to 90 minutes reviewing those questions. So if you're doing two blocks of questions a day, that's 2 hours to do the questions and potentially 3 to 4 hours to review them. And then, so let's just say it's 4 hours to review them, 2 hours to do your questions. That's 6 hours, and you're studying 8 hours a day. Then I would do content review for 2 hours during that day as well. And the way that the way that I structure my content review, and the way that content review kind of gets remembered or retained the best, is doing spaced repetition. So you can break all the content down into, for step 1, I believe it's 16 different subjects. And the way that I find the subjects is I go into first aid, and first aid has kind of 16 separate chapters that include like endocrine, biostats, and epidemiology. You have biochemistry, cardio, renal, pulmonology, neurology, all these different topics, repro. And you want to be doing these questions or reviewing these topics independently. You can't do everything every day, but try to pick 1 to 2 topics to review every single day. So if I was doing cardio renal one day, the next day I'd be doing pulm and biochem, and the day after I would be focusing in on epidemiology and biostats, plus maybe some immunology. And there's 16 subjects, so if you're reviewing 2 a day, every 8 days you kind of repeat that cycle, and you want to kind of spread it out so not everything's being repeated in the same order, and it gives you a nice spaced repetition of all the materials that you're covering. But basically every 8 days you're going to be reviewing the content. Some days you'll be seeing content one day and then the next day. Sometimes it will be one day and then 8 days later. Ultimately, you're not going to be able to review all the content within a few days before the exam. The maximum that you're going to have out before you actually take the exam is 8 days. So you have to be comfortable with that idea too. Most people want to be like, okay, I'm taking my exam on Friday. This next Wednesday, Thursday, I'm going to review everything in first aid. That's just realistically not possible. It's too much material. It won't allow you to see the things that you actually need to see and need to be focusing in on. And it's just not really a good use of your time. So the spaced repetition is really how you hone in on your content review, and then the practice questions allows you to see everything every single day, even though you may not realize that. When you're doing 80 to 120 questions a day, you're testing a lot of different topics. So let's say I didn't see cardio for 7 days, I'm still seeing cardio every single day because I'm seeing it in my question blocks. So it's just something to be aware of, and know that it may not feel like you're actually seeing these topics, but you are reviewing them. You're building your knowledge base, and you are retaining information that way as well. So after everything's marked out visually, and this kind of all happens with your, once you set your test date and how many weeks you have, next is kind of incorporating when you're going to take these practice tests. So what I recommend is when you first start off your dedicated time period, you want to do a practice test to start off, just to see where you are. And then if you're doing a 6-week schedule, I would wait around 1.5 to 2 weeks to take your second one, and then 1.5 to 2 weeks to take your third, and then 1 week after for all the rest until you actually go on to take your exam. Typically what I see from my own experience and from helping students while I was in preclinical, before I actually served as a formal tutor, and throughout my time serving as a formal tutor, people tend to get their biggest increases from their first assessment to their second, and from their second to the third. So usually anywhere from the first week up to the fourth week is when your scores take the biggest jumps. After that is when you're trying to aim for more consistency, meaning you probably wouldn't have gotten time to review everything that you wanted at the level of depth that you really wanted to. And this is your time to kind of hone in on those small knowledge gaps that you have, and really make yourself feel more confident when you come into test day, because you probably would be fine after that 4-week period, but you won't feel as confident as you would if you studied for another week or another 2 weeks. That additional week or that additional 2 weeks is really to get your confidence up and make sure that you know that what you're doing is really working, and that when you go in to take the test, you won't get like frazzled or thrown off by any questions that you may not have seen. Everything that will be there is something that you kind of would have expected. And just as like a little anecdote, I know when I took step two, they have questions that you answer the first one and you can't answer the second one until you answer the first one. And then it'll tell you the answer to the first question so that you can answer the second one. They're 2-part questions. The very first question on my step 2 exam, I know I got wrong because, I mean, it told me. I basically knew the very first thing I got wrong, and that could have really thrown me off, but I felt confident in my knowledge base. And I knew like everything that I'd practiced and everything that I'd kind of studied up until that point would allow me to continue on throughout the test and not kind of get thrown off by knowing that the first question on the first block of the test, I got wrong. So that's going to really help you when you actually come to actually take the test and feel really confident and prepared. And then just some resources that helped me throughout my first 2 years and studying for actual board exams. So I think where you're starting off now is a little bit different than where you're going to end. I think that there's a lot of really good review resource materials for step 1. So first aid is great. Sketchy is great. Pathoma is great. Boards and Beyond, those are all great resources. And I think that those will really help you learn the content and review for your exams in school. But you can't use all of those resources when you're actually studying for your board exams, because that's too many resources. And Pathoma, Boards and Beyond, and Sketchy don't really cover everything comprehensively. The only thing that really covers everything very comprehensively, in my opinion, is first aid. First aid will kind of give you an overview of everything that you need to know. It's not as in depth as some of the other resources like Sketchy or Boards and Beyond or even Pathoma, but some of that detail is detail that you don't need to be reviewing when you're going up into the board exams, stuff that you probably are building your knowledge base throughout this next year. And those are really good review sources when you're studying for the tests in school. But when it comes down to that last 6 to 8 weeks, I recommend kind of sticking to just one review source and learning that review source very thoroughly. So the way that I do first aid and I have my students do first aid, when you get into your dedicated period, everything's spaced repetition, and they'll spend anywhere from 60 minutes to 2 hours on a subject per day, usually 2 subjects a day. So they're spending anywhere from 2 to 4 hours just reviewing first aid, and they'll be doing 2 reviews. So when you start off, you'll be doing, let's just say you're starting off with cardio and renal on the first day. You'll read through your cardio and renal sections. You're not going to finish the entire chapter. You may only get through 5 or 6 pages, and that's totally fine. Once you get to that block again, once you're reviewing cardio and renal again, you continue where you left off and you review the next 6 to 10 pages, anywhere between that length, and then you can do it again, and then you do it again. Eventually you'll get through first aid, the entire like cover to cover first aid once, and what you'll see is On your second review, you're able to review cardiology. Let's say it took you 4 sessions to review all cardiology the first time. That was your first pass. The next time it took you 2 sessions. And then the time after that, it took you 1 session. So you reviewed cardio 3 times in its entirety, and you kind of picked up on all of the little details that you weren't getting before. And that really helps you with the spaced repetition and learning the kind of minutia of the test. Some other resources, a lot of people use Anki. I was never a fan of flashcards, but I know a lot of people use them and they use it pretty successfully. So if you wanted to use Anki in the same vein for spaced repetition, that would be another very valuable resource if that's something that you've been doing and want to continue using, especially throughout board prep. But you want to be making sure that you're reviewing the cards that you don't know. Reviewing cards that you do know, it's just going to make you feel good. It's not going to actually improve your scores. The entire purpose of board prep and board review, it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult. It's somewhat mentally draining, and that's why you need time off too. That's why I kind of always recommend like at least 1 day off a week to kind of do whatever you need to do. Go out, take a free day, go for a walk, go to the gym, go play golf, whatever you like to do. Play video games all day. That's fine. You need a day to kind of like de-stress and decompress because board studying's supposed to be hard. If everything you're reviewing is easy, that means that you're reviewing stuff that you kind of already know. And you need to be focusing in on the stuff that you don't know, which is kind of where the difficult part comes in. So my only problem with Anki is I think it's easy for people to use it incorrectly and focus on the questions that they or the flashcards that they know, and it makes them feel good to like get those questions correct. You want to be reviewing stuff that you don't. So that's just if you are going to use that resource, just make sure that you're kind of always in that place where I'm not sure if I'm like maybe I'm getting 60% of these correct, and I really need to review the other 40%, and I'm going to focus in on those 40% for that day, something like that. Other than that, for resources, UWorld for question banks when you're actually in your dedicated time period is definitely your best resource. I personally think less resources are better than more resources. So currently, after taking step 1, I used more than one resource. I used UWorld First Aid and I used Sketchy for farm and micro, and that was great. But UWorld First Aid has micro and farm too. And I should have just trusted that. And for some reason, I was like, okay, Sketchy has a lot of good memory tools. I want to use that. And I think that kind of overloaded me on some of those subjects and it made my studying harder. And I wasn't actually doing as well in micro as I thought I should be doing until I kind of went away from Sketchy and started slowly using First Aid. And that was only during the last like 2 weeks of my board prep for step 1. For step 2, I only used UWorld and I only used First Aid. And that was every single day that I studied less than I did for step 1. I actually took a day off every week, even though I said to do it for step 1. I didn't realistically take a day off every week. Some days I would take 2 days off a week when I was studying for step 2, and I studied for less time. I only studied for 5 weeks, and I ended up doing better. So from my own personal experience, I definitely felt more confident going into that exam. I felt like I knew the material better, and I ended up scoring higher on all my practice tests and on the real exam, just because I limited it down to 2 resources where I really felt like I was an expert at answering all my UWorld questions, and I felt I was the expert at First Aid. And I think that that's like something to really take away from this is really just try to limit yourself. Everybody says, oh, like I'm using boards and beyond for this subject, I'm using First Aid for this subject, and I'm going to do Anki for these. Just use something that's comprehensive and that will get you everything that you need. And that's going to be more than enough. It's better to be an expert at one thing than kind of an expert at a topic in pathoma, and an expert at a topic in boards and beyond, and an expert at 5 different topics in First Aid. And then it's just not going to get you to the same place as being an expert in that one topic will be. And then just a little bit more going off of where you are currently starting off your second year. Your first year and your second year is really years to build your foundation, your knowledge base, which is what you're doing. So every single exam that you take in school, whether that be every 4 weeks or 8 weeks, try to take those exams as if they're almost mini board exams. You want to know that subject material as well as you possibly can, because that's going to build the best foundation for board prep as possible. And you should be incorporating those practice questions during that time period too. Eventually, when it comes down to the end of your second year, that's when you want to start getting your study schedule like really packed away, and you want to be able to stick to that. You want it to be something that's realistic, something that you think will challenge you, but not too challenging. And then you want to be setting your practice question goals, everything in your study schedule with questions and with your content review should be spaced repetition. And then ultimately, taking tests is somewhat of a skill. So practice test is going to be your best representation of the real day environment and how you're actually progressing. And then just one more thing about practice questions. So when you first start off doing practice questions, doing them untimed and on tutor mode is perfectly fine, especially when you're doing it for content review for your in-school exams. But as you start to kind of get farther along the year, maybe come March or even slightly earlier if you want to, is when you want to start doing questions on untimed and not tutor mode. So you don't want to be stressed for the amount of time, but you want to be used to doing questions without getting immediate feedback. And then eventually, as you start getting into your dedicated time period, you're going to be doing questions that are timed, that are random, and full blocks. And another thing just to stray away from for when you're timing your questions, if you're doing anything under 20 questions, so 20 questions gives you a half hour to do them with normal standard pacing. Anything under 20 questions, it gets really hard to do that in the amount of time allocated. So if you're going to do a 10 question block, you only get 15 minutes. And what you'll see is certain questions take you longer to answer than others. So if you get a 10 question block with really long answer stems or difficult content that makes you think a little bit longer, it might not be that easy to get that done in 15 minutes versus a full 20 questions or a full 40 question block. Even though it's the same amount of time per question, there will be easier questions that you'll be able to answer more quickly, and you'll be able to allocate more time for the questions that maybe would require a little bit more thinking or a little bit more reading. So anything under 20 questions, I also just would say, just try to stick away from doing those timed. And then just a little bit about MedSchoolCoach and how they can help you. So what we do is we kind of sorry about that. Everybody who works at MedSchoolCoach is a USMLE or COMLEX tutor. If it's COMLEX tutor, we're DO students, so we've taken COMLEX and we've also taken STEP. We've all done well in our exams, and we kind of all have had similar experiences preparing for the exams, preparing for our preclinical education, our clinical rotations, and we kind of know how to get on track to get the exam scores that you want. From my own experience working with students, I think what we offer the most is how to set up a study schedule and really doing that for you. And then also helping identify your weaknesses. So a lot of people, when they're doing questions, don't fully understand why they're getting things wrong at first. And that could be, I mean, for everybody, it's different. So it's kind of our job to kind of go in and diagnose what the issue is. Is it that you're particularly weak in a certain type of content? Are you having a hard time kind of understanding what the question is asking, or are you getting thrown off by certain things in the question that makes you think it's asking you something else? Do you understand the content perfectly well and you're just getting thrown off by the last sentence, and you just can't really understand what the question is trying to ask of you? Those are all probably the biggest mistakes that I've seen, and the biggest way that I've been able to help people, either by pointing out where their weaknesses are or helping them identify what the question is really trying to ask of them and how to do that more quickly and more efficiently so they don't struggle with timing or anything like that. So I think that's kind of where we come in and we help you. We use kind of our own experiences. Everybody has a little bit of different experience, and kind of try to set up a schedule to try to pair you with a tutor that has similar background or similar experiences to something that you have. and get the best pairing possible. So at this point, if you guys want to talk a little bit more about MedSchoolCoach, or we could go into the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Halpern, for that wonderful presentation. I'm sure the students found much, knowledge in that, especially the fact that, you touched on your personal experiences of taking the exam. So thank you again. If you can go ahead and go on the next slide, please. All right. So I want to just give you guys a little, kind of piggyback off what Dr. Halpern was saying about MedSchoolCoach. So what we do here at MedSchoolCoach is we help students become physicians. And we actually don't work, exclusively just with med students. We actually work all the way back from high school students all the way up until medical students in their third and fourth years of going on to residency. So we really work with, a wide spectrum of students to help them, get into their goal of ultimately becoming a physician. So we have over 50 physicians on board with us with experience with admissions committees who've helped thousands of students get accepted to residency programs across the nation. What we do is we help establish your brand as a student and help you prep for interviews, along with USMLE prep, COMLEX prep. So we really do, we run the whole thing. We help you just, get to that goal of you becoming a physician. So whatever issues you might have along your journey, we're there to help you out. Also, I wanted to let you guys know that because of you guys attended this webinar today, you guys are actually entitled to receive a free admissions consultation with one of our advisors at MedSchoolCoach. So what our advisors do is we kind of understand your story a little bit more, help understand what you're going through at the moment, what kind of prep or help you might need. They hear you out, and then we try to get you set up with the right resources to help you out there. So if you guys want to be on the lookout for that, I'm going to be dropping a link in the chat. That way you guys can go ahead and book that consultation if you guys would like. As well as that, I'm also going to be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, continue.
Yeah, so I'm also going to be launching a poll as well, guys. So you guys can go ahead and be on the lookout for that poll. It's live at the moment, so you can answer whenever you like. So still waiting on a couple of responses.
So I just see a question in the chat that I can just address now too while people are answering the poll. So I know I was talking about a lot of the USMLE prep resources, and people know about the ComBank or ComQuest, COMLEX preparation resources as well. So I know my school gave us ComBank for step 1 and they gave us ComQuest for step 2. Both of those are good resources. Both of them are good resources if your school provides them for you for free and something that you can be looking at now. I actually started with ComBank and then our school gave us USMLE RX for free, and I switched over to that before my dedicated time period when I started using UWorld. In my opinion, the tests are very similar but very different in a way as well. And I know it doesn't necessarily make sense, but for the most part, the tests are asking you the same material. It's just how they ask you those questions is slightly different. I think that the way that COMLEX tends to ask you questions versus how the NBME asks you questions is COMLEX is very much more straightforward. They're not as high order thinking questions as how the NBME does. So UWorld typically follows more of that NBME format of higher order questions. I think that's probably more beneficial for you to be answering questions in that higher order format because it makes you think more. And then when you get to COMLEX, it's a little bit more straightforward. What you'll see in COMLEX though, is there are a lot of questions that are questions that you either know it or you don't. And there's gonna be a lot more questions that you don't know, just simply because they test a little bit more randomly, a lot more random topics, a lot more low yield micro things sometimes, which don't necessarily correlate to how you're gonna do on the exam. I think My only big issue with the more COMLEX heavy resources is they sometimes lead you down these weird rabbit holes, getting you to answer questions that aren't as high yield. Whereas if you focused on like all the ethics questions that COMLEX may ask you, which is going to be like the legal and ethics stuff is going to be a lot more on COMLEX than it is on STEP. Even if you're not going to take STEP, I think it's better to focus on the content that STEP is testing, because they're going to be more so focused, especially in UWorld, on your major systems like cardio, like renal, like pulm, neuro, endocrine, all those things. And on both tests, that's the majority of the tests anyway. And if you're scoring highly on those subjects, that's going to correlate to you scoring higher on COMLEX. So the way that I always kind of put this and the way that I put it to students is the tests are asking you the same questions and it's testing the same knowledge base. The only difference is COMLEX is really asking you OMM questions as well. OMM is something that I always studied separately after I took STEP, which is something that, I mean, we could talk about too, but I think that if you are well prepared for step one, or if you prepare how you'd be preparing for COMLEX level 1 through the same approach as you would prepare for step 1 by doing UWorld, by doing your first stage reviews, that's going to lead you to getting a higher exam score than if you were to prepare for like a COMLEX test solely. Just because that's what the majority of the content's covering anyway. And it's going to help you during your clinical exams as well. And if you are deciding to take step 2 in the future, it's going to help you on step 2. It shouldn't have any bearing on the way of whether or not you're going to pass COMLEX. In my opinion, I think step 1 is actually an easier test than COMLEX level 1. I think that the way they ask questions is more higher order, but getting those questions, the questions are a little bit harder to like answer because they're a little bit higher order, and COMLEX is a little bit more straightforward. But COMLEX, for me personally, if I did just a pure percentage, my COMLEX percentage correct was lower than my UWorld percentage correct or my MBME percentage correct. And it wasn't because of missing content. It was just because of these obscure subjects that they were testing on. But usually my percentiles were higher in COMLEX because it doesn't require you to have the same percentage correct. So that's what I would take away from it. I don't think that necessarily doing ComBank or ComQuest is as good as doing UWorld. I would definitely stick with UWorld first. And if you want to use something else instead of like USMLE RX, you do ComBank or do ComQuest. Either of those would be fine.
Thank you for that response. Yeah, so if you guys, we have about 10 minutes left. You guys have any questions you'd like to ask? Feel free to ask them in the chat, and then we will go ahead and read them off here. Okay, so I see a student here ask, can you please repeat what you said regarding STEP? It's best to study STEP then OMM because the test was similar.
Yeah, so a lot of people give advice on this. So the way that I did it and the way that people older than me advised me as well is I took step 1 and then a week later I took step 2. So I gave myself, I also took step 1 on a Friday and I gave myself that weekend off, and I took COMLEX level 1 on the next Friday. So I had that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to study. Usually at the end of your first year, you have to do like a comprehensive COMLEX exam, whether that be demonstrating your skills or something like that. So at the end of your second year is when you're going to review a lot of COMLEX, but that's kind of before or at the very beginning of your dedicated time period when you're prepping. So that's a good time to like actually like learn that. I think the Green Book is a great resource for that. It's a very quick book to read. It goes through like everything that you'll need to know, and that will kind of get you used to getting the OMM questions. And then everybody was telling me when I took it that like all you need is 2 days to like kind of restudy the OMM. I was too nervous to do that, but realistically, like 2 days is definitely enough. If you're gonna get nervous about it, give yourself a week like I did. So this way you don't feel rushed. You don't feel like you're cramming everything. But OMM is more so, there's some stuff that's a little bit memorization heavy. You will have already kind of studied it pretty thoroughly getting into the end of your second year, because you're usually assessed on that. I'm pretty sure almost every school does that. So yeah, I think studying for STEP and then kind of doing the OMM portion of it after is all you need to do. You don't need to dedicate. The only thing that's different is really doing that OMM portion. Everything else in terms of the content, the questions they're asking is going to be very similar. They're just a little bit, they're framed differently, but the content's all the same aside from OMM.
Someone here asked, what is the average number of tests you take for practice?
So I think that depends on your study schedule. So it depends on how many weeks you have and how many exams are available. So the I did the NBME ones. The NBME updates their forms every year, so they delete old forms and sometimes they add new forms, so it changes. Usually there's 3 to 4. I'm not entirely sure how many are available right now. It could be 3, it could be 4. I know when I was taking it, there was 4, so I did the 4 NBMEs and the 2-year-old self-assessments. The good thing about the NBME is if you are taking STEP, I know that, like, focusing on COMLEX, I think doing your 2 URL self-assessments and 1 NBME is perfectly fine. But the NBMEs, there are questions that have pictures on them, and those pictures, usually out of the 4 forms or 3 forms that are available, one of those pictures will show up on your actual exam. It happens, like, everybody I know who's done the NBMEs and then took STEP, there was always a picture from an NBME that showed up on their actual exam. So it's a nice confidence booster when you get that question again, to know exactly what that picture is. But I also just think, like, it's a good representation. They're new questions, and they're very accurate in kind of determining where you are for STEP at least.
All right, thank you. So we'll give it a moment or two. If any questions roll in. If not, we can wrap things up early. Also, guys, there's a QR code there in the middle of the screen, so you can also book the meeting on your phone that way. All right, I think that just about does it. So we can start by giving some closing remarks. I want to thank all you guys for attending today. It was like I said, I hope you guys really found benefit in this. Something we're really looking forward to hosting for you guys as you guys are preparing for your COMLEX preparation. I can pass it off to the panelists here. If you guys have any closing remarks at all you'd like to give before we close?
Yeah, thank you guys for listening, and good luck throughout the rest of the medical school and your board preparation. I hope that you guys found this somewhat helpful, and yeah, good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Halpern. Everyone, please use your resources. If it's available, take it, use it. It's there for you.
Thank you, Dr. Halpern, and thanks you guys for coming. Hope you learned a lot and took some notes for this time next year. Hope you have a great summer.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.